Look at everybody here. Hi there. So we're live. My name is Jeremy Nichols. I'm the Climate and Energy Program Director for Wild Earth Guardians. And every week we do a weekly Facebook Live check-in every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. So thanks for joining us. We're doing our regular check-in today. Today, I'm super excited about this Facebook Live event because we're in Portland, Oregon, and we're having a strategic retreat with the Wild Earth Guardians program directors. So in case you didn't know, Wild Earth Guardians has 4 programs: climate and energy, wildlife, wild places, and wild rivers. We also have basically our staff attorney program, which we'll give the staff attorneys an honorary program designation too. So technically 5 programs. And I have with me today the directors of these programs. So we're going to go around here, have everybody introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Lauris. I'm the Wildlife Program Director.
I'm Jen Pells, and I'm the Wild Rivers Program Director.
I'm Samantha Ruskavich Bars, and I'm the Managing Attorney.
I'm Judy Brower. I'm the Wild Places Program Director.
And so today I thought we would take advantage of us all being together in Portland, Oregon to talk a bit about the intersection between climate and energy issues, and the work that you all are doing, which very much relates to climate change, has so many, to say intersectional is kind of an understatement. It really just underlies everything that we're working on right now, whether it's putting more water in rivers, whether it's protecting public lands. Climate change is a big issue and a big factor that we take into account as we're doing this work. So I thought today we would just engage in a conversation about some of the great work that my fellow program directors are doing. Over the past 2 weeks, in case you haven't checked in recently, we've had some great Facebook Live events. Last week we were at the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We talked a lot about what the Climate and Energy Program is doing to confront the climate crisis head on. But what my fellow program directors are doing to confront the climate crisis is equally important. It may not be as hard-hitting as keeping it in the ground, but it's so important and necessary. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way. I didn't mean it that way. What I meant was that we are all in our own ways confronting the climate crisis, and it's very important to feature the work of my fellow program directors. So let's get started. And please, if you have questions or want to check in, we're on the Wild Earth Guardians. Well, you're on here right now. Feel free to ask us questions. And again, my name is Jeremy Nichols. I'm the Climate and Energy Program Director for Wild Earth Guardians. So I thought I'd check in first with Lindsay here, who is the Wildlife Program Director. Lindsay's been dealing with a lot of issues that very much relate to climate change recently. And one of the big things that happened, Lindsay, is that the Trump administration rolled back rules to protect endangered species. And it does seem like climate denial was a big factor in those rollbacks. You want
Sure.
Tell us more.
Sure. So in August, the Trump administration finalized some proposed rules for the Endangered Species Act, which, as most of you probably know, is one of the key environmental statutes that we have to use in our toolbox, especially for litigation purposes. So one of the big changes to this that just went into effect last week on September 26th, involves reasonably foreseeable future in terms of making a listing decision.
Right, so when they protect endangered species, they want to see whether they might go extinct in what's called the reasonably foreseeable future.
Correct. And basically a big word change was going from the probable to likely. So when you think about the foreseeable future, they want to make sure that when Fish and Wildlife Services is looking at these petitions, is it a foreseeable future that they can assess with all likelihood? And that change means that climate change is not going to be really taken into account, because that's so far in the future that it's hard for a lot of folks at Fish and Wildlife Services, I guess, to decide that in a petition. And we've seen that come out in practice even before these have gone into place officially, with the Joshua tree, which is a species that we're fighting to protect.
Right, the iconic Joshua tree, which Guardians has played a big role in helping to draw attention to in terms of its imperiled status, right?
Correct. Joshua tree has a very limited range. It's in the desert in southeastern California, primarily in Joshua Tree National Park, its namesake park, and we had filed a petition to list the Joshua tree. There's a lot of science, a lot of climate model analysis showing that the Joshua tree will go extinct by the end of 2100, or by the end of this century, essentially.
Wow.
Yeah, but according to Fish and Wildlife Services that recently denied our petition for listing, that is not foreseeable future. because it is too
So-
far out in the future for them to make
all
that.
the science says it's going to go extinct in the face of climate change if we don't do something now, but they're saying, but that's still too far down the road.
Correct. They say
That's
climate denial. They say that's not reasonably. That's not foreseeable future. It's not with likelihood. And this was before the new rules came out. Right now, that argument that they would make would be stronger under these new regulations. But all in all, that's saying that looking into the future, we have to wait until it's really a crisis. Really, the species is about to be extinct before we can do something to prevent it. And by that point, it might be
it's
too late.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we are both fighting to protect the Joshua Tree as well as part of a coalition to fight these regulations that went into effect.
And we sued. We went to federal court like immediately after they were adopted.
Immediately. We were one of the first petitions on file. Now I'm happy to say that 17 states have filed a petition through their attorney general's offices.
Including several Western states, which is great to see Western governors stand up for endangered species and AGs stand up for endangered species.
Correct.
Yeah.
Especially since so many of these species that we want to protect are in the West. And
Right.
this is not just a hypothetical situation. Climate change is real. We want to make sure that they're protected while we still have time to do something about it.
Right. It's so great. And the Fish and Wildlife Service under Trump, unfortunately, has its head completely buried in the sand when it comes to climate science. So we're going to the courts. We're doing what we can to try to hold them accountable to the realities of our climate crisis.
That's right.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Lindsay. That's great. So next we're going to go to Jen Pels, our Wild Rivers Program Director. Jen, the Wild Rivers Program was just in federal court in Denver, in fact, in front of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. And it was a case involving whether the federal government has to take into account endangered species in the middle Rio Grande River when they manage their dam operations. And they're saying they don't have to. They could care less, and that's totally fine. And I know the case that Sam actually argued, Sam Ruscavage-Barrs, our managing attorney in before the 10th Circuit, tried to argue that no, they actually have a duty to take into account the management of these dams and the river flows, the need to restore flows to the Rio Grande River. And to me, it just seems so critical now. I mean, every time the federal government has discretion to do more for endangered species, they should be doing it in the face of climate change. So this case, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this case? Because I see it as so important in terms of the bigger picture of addressing the climate crisis, but also holding the federal government accountable to the realities of endangered species and climate science.
Yeah, so this case is a really interesting case. It involves the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Corps of Engineers operates dams in the Rio Grande Basin. They largely control the flows in the river and have a lot of ability to change the flows in a way that actually helps endangered species and helps the river flows and the habitat and the ecosystem. And the Corps of Engineers has been doing this for a long time, and then finally decided in 2014 that they reassessed their legal authority and decided that they actually had no responsibility to talk to the Fish and Wildlife Service and to manage the species, which is
Again, head in the sand, right?
yes, exactly. And so we brought the Corps of Engineers to court, and we argued essentially that the Flood Control Act, while it was, which is what authorizes them to use these reservoirs, there's discretion in there for them to operate in a way that allows flows in the river for endangered species, and that they, because they have that discretion, have to talk to the Fish and Wildlife Service and come up with the different opportunities and ways in which they can do that.
So it's so important, these little areas where we can compel the federal government to follow through with its legal obligations. And on the Rio Grande, it's so critical because the Rio Grande, it's projected to get hammered by climate change.
Yeah, the
right?
Rio Grande is already experiencing climate change in a really big way. Flows are already reduced from what they were historically, and the predictions are that the Rio Grande Basin will lose 30 to 50% of its water just due to the impacts of climate change by the end of the century, which there's already vast sections of the Rio Grande that are dry, and so if you take out 30% or half the water, then there will be huge reaches of dry river, which means that no ecosystem can thrive in that.
And already the Wild Rivers Program has documented the river going dry for many, many miles due to water diversions. And, this year was a crazy big water year.
This
There's
year was
so much water.
wettest year in at least a decade, probably going back a lot further than that, and yet still in August,
It dried up.
diversions and water managers have just decided that they can dry the river because they believe this false narrative that somehow the river used to dry historically, which is not true.
Not true at all, not true. But it will dry if the climate crisis has its way, so we're trying to do everything we can to restore the flows and get conservation of this river back on track. So that's great. And Sam, you argued in front of the 10th Circuit. What do you think? How Where's it going to go? Where's the case going to go?
Well, it was a pretty exciting case because you really saw the government stand up there with its head in the sand, trying to get the court to go back to 1960 when the dams were originally authorized, and just using legal technicalities and words and phrases here and there in the statute, and just taking away any responsibility. So as the conditions are getting worse in the river, the conditions for the species too are getting worse in the river. The government is trying to go back to 1960 and just say, we don't have any responsibility to do anything about this. We manage these dams for flood control. That's all that we're supposed to do. They're ignoring all the subsequent legislation that talks about needing to take species protection and environmental protections into account in river operations, and that was just on full display during the argument in front of the 10th Circuit. The good news is that the judges did not seem to be buying that narrative, and really were considering what the current conditions were and how the Army Corps should be taking into account what's going on environmentally, how they can use their responsibilities for flood control and management of these dams to really do something that would benefit the species. So while the dams are and have been positive in certain ways with respect to flood control and getting that under control, they also are negative in the sense that they are ruining the river and ruining the species habitat. And so now it's time for the federal government to really look at what are the opportunities that are there for us to use our existing authority to do something to prevent river drying and to prevent species extinction.
Right, because that's the whole issue here. This is the species involved. It's a fish, the Rio Grande silvery minnow, which sounds really diminutive, but it's actually a super, super important critter. It's an indicator of the health of the river. So as it's declined and become imperiled, it's very clear the river's not healthy, which is not good for human communities either, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the whole that I know sometimes folks say, well, if we put more water in the river, that's less water for people. But at the end of the day, if you create a healthier, more resilient river, there will be water for both, right? I mean,
right. I mean, these listed species are like the canary in the coal mine. They're an indicator that the river is not healthy and not sustainable. And so protecting that ecosystem and restoring that ecosystem along the river is ultimately going to be good for people as well.
It's improving their quality of life.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other species that are not extinct yet, but that will be on the brink if we don't protect those critical keystone species, like the silvery minnow.
It's almost like, river management is entering this new climate-informed era, and we're having to drag the federal government into this era, kicking and screaming, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. The day of building the big dams and just doing it under the guise of flood control is over, right?
It is over, yeah.
So
we definitely need to take a turn and really think about what it looks like in the 21st century. Like we tried to, solve our water problems by building dams, and now we're experiencing the impacts of what we did to the environment now.
I think we'll do a Facebook Live event just on river systems because I think there's so much to unpack there. We're talking about the Rio Grande, but the Colorado River, so many other western rivers, face this dilemma where the dams are actually hindering their ability to be resilient in the face of climate change. And that's a big paradigm shift for a lot of people, I know. So Judy, let's go to you. Judy is our Wild Places Program Director. She works a lot on public lands conservation, mainly national forest conservation. And a big part of what Judy does is try to protect and restore resilient national forests. What we're seeing is that in the face of the climate crisis, it's more important than ever to have large contiguous tracts of protected public lands, and to make sure that those lands and the streams they might support, the habitat they support, are as vibrant and healthy as ever. So Judy, tell us a little bit about just tell us a little bit about that,
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, what our program is working on is in addressing the impacts that climate change is having and is going to have on public lands and the species that live there, and then also on recreation and the people that want to go out on those public lands and enjoy bird watching or hunting or fishing or hiking or skiing or any of those activities that we love to do on national forests in the West. So our main programs within the Wild Places program are rewilding, where we are trying to rewild public lands by removing unneeded roads, restoring stream habitat, reducing habitat fragmentation so that species can move from one place to another and fish can move up and down streams and into different habitats. And then we're also doing restoration, so we do on-the-ground restoration to restore riparian stream habitat throughout New Mexico. And we have a very large Keep Public Lands in Public Hands campaign, and that means preventing the federal government from giving away or selling federal lands to corporations or the private interests that want to develop them. And in this day and age, in this administration, it also means addressing the effective privatization of public lands. A lot of what Jeremy's doing with oil and gas,
right,
mining, and preventing the agencies from just opening public lands to corporate interests so that they can extract all the resources and leave everybody a mess and destroy all the habitat. So we have a big job that we're working on. And we also have a big campaign down in southern New Mexico on the Gila for large landscape protection. And I believe that is the future of public lands protection, is focusing on large landscape scale protection efforts where you are doing the restoration, the rewilding, the protection, the restoration of forest ecosystems and riparian ecosystems, and really looking at the forest as a whole on a landscape level and not just one small timber sale here or mining project there. You have to look at it as a whole because it's all habitat and it's all places that we love.
And I know a lot of our focus over the years has been on protecting wilderness areas, which are protected areas that they're free from development and even motorized use. And I know that the trend has been to designate wilderness areas, but they've been really small. And, you know, not to diminish the importance of all wilderness, but in this day of age with our climate crisis, Guardians is really looking at big wilderness and not just wilderness, like the big W wilderness is what we call it, that's truly protected, but contiguous tracts of land that are free from development, free from impacts of exploitation, and where restoration is the emphasis on management. Like in the Gila in western New Mexico, that's a big part of what we're looking at right now, right?
Yeah, and we need those large tracts of land. They may not, within the wilderness is completely free from development, and as you get outside of wilderness, there may be more development. There may be roads that are necessary. There may be different management activities that happen there and different types of recreation, but we have to recognize that we need those contiguous areas of land for wide roaming species, everything from grizzly bear to deer, elk, antelope, birds, migratory birds. Everything relies on these large contiguous areas of land that have to be healthy and resilient to the impacts of climate change. So with climate change, forests are drying out. And I was just actually did a webinar yesterday where I learned that the major issue driving fire and wildfire is not necessarily the number of trees, but the drying of the land. So the drier a place is, no matter how many trees it has, if it has a lot of trees or just a few trees, the drier it is, the more likely it is to burn.
Yeah.
And so things like roads and development and mines and things like that open up areas and kind of destroy habitat will cause areas to dry out, and those areas will burn.
It's almost like a feedback loop. The drier it gets, the more susceptible it is to fires, the more climate change has an impact.
Right. And the more access people have into these areas, the more likelihood they are to burn, because actually people cause more fires than say lightning or other natural conditions.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and a lot of you talked about some of the restoration work, and I know that some of the restoration work you're doing is focused on trying to bring beavers back into these forest ecosystems. And beavers are amazing in terms of creating resiliency by virtue of their dams and their ponds and how they help manage hydrologic systems in a way that sustains water flows even in the face of some pretty harsh weather conditions and climate changes, right? And you guys just did a great thing this past weekend in New Mexico, restoring beaver habitat. Tell us a little bit about that.
So what beavers do is they create dams which effectively back water up, and beavers help to raise the groundwater level. So it raises the level of water in streams, but it also raises the level of groundwater in the surrounding area. So you have a larger contiguous area of wetter habitat that's going to be more resilient to the effects of climate change. It's going to be more resilient to dewatering. It's going to be more resilient to higher temperatures, and it's going to be more resilient to fire. So when you have beaver, you have this incredible habitat. And what our restoration program director, Reed Whittlesey, has been doing is working with the Forest Service to create beaver dam analogs. So we effectively build human-created beaver dams using willow and other woods that beavers would use, and hoping that the beavers will then come in. So creating the habitat that would be helpful for beaver. And what happened was, for 3 of those analogs that we created, beaver returned naturally. They're there. And so they're now using those BDAs as their homes, and it's so cool.
BDAs, unfortunate
BDAs,
acronym.
I know.
Beaver dam analogs.
Beaver dam analog.
That
But
phrase in
they're
and of
there.
itself is a
But
little
now
now
we can just call them beaver dams because
The
they
beavers there.
are
Yeah.
the beavers are there, and this stream actually runs into the Rio Grande. So
natural flood control
natural flood control and
at the
natural
right scale and level.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super exciting. Super exciting.
Yes, so check out some of the pictures on our website. And as we've been sharing throughout this Facebook Live event, been sharing links to our other program pages and some of the latest news in terms of the work they're doing. Definitely check it all out. I think, hearing about all the great work that my fellow program directors are doing, it really underscores like how Guardians is so effective and I think very strategic in what it does, is that we're looking at the bigger picture. We're going after the direct greenhouse gas emissions and trying to deal with those, but we're also dealing with the whole cascade of impacts related to climate change and trying to make sure that we're keeping wildlife intact, wild places intact, and keeping the rivers alive in the face of the climate crisis, which really we're covering all the bases, which is really awesome. Gives me a lot of hope that we have a chance of protecting and restoring the American West, but it's tough. And I know we're facing right now, especially in terms of the Trump administration, I mean, just an unprecedented attack on our environmental and health safeguards nationwide. That Westerners are particularly hard hit just because it's already an arid climate, and it's already been very stressed because of a lot of industrial abuse over the years and a lot of privatization in a way. So we have our work cut out for us. I guess I'm going to go around again. I want to know from each of you, what is the one thing that gives you hope that we'll succeed? And I know that as we're coming off a week of climate strike action and a lot of great optimism, but a recognition that the challenge is enormous. But what gives you hope? I want to hear you.
Sure. I was fortunate enough to be in Washington, D.C. during the climate strikes and seeing just the outpouring of support from the young community and also people who were not so young. Seeing that intergenerational outpouring on a Friday, walking towards the Capitol, it was really amazing. And speaking to decision makers in Washington about the importance of the Endangered Species Act, not a single one of them said, we shouldn't have this, we should weaken this act. It's has such strong popular support. I can't imagine that the attacks on it are going to be successful. No elected officials seem to want those attacks to go through, so I was really hopeful after that week.
Yeah, that's so important to underscore here, is that protecting endangered species, huge amount of popular support. So that's really cool. Jen?
Yeah, I think one of the things that inspires me is my children. I have 2 little girls, and I see that they're really interested in climate science. They're really interested in trying to figure out how to protect the world around them. And my one daughter loves polar bears, and she used that as an icon of like, this species is not going to be around and might have kids later on. And so I think it's really inspiring, not only from a global perspective that young people are waking up. But I think from a just personal perspective, I see that my kids are really conscious, and they talk to their kids, and they boo as coal goes down in a train, and
Yeah.
it's just an instinct. It's just like they're learning, and they're making judgments and making choices for their future. And I think that is going to be the power of changing our country and the way that we've been, is that putting in new, inspiring new voices and new people to come through and say, we're going to change, we can do this, we can live a sustainable lifestyle and still and not be extracting all of our resources and calling them resources and kind of commoditizing them, and actually seeing a river as a living thing. One of my favorite things is we play like guessing games, and I always pick a river, and they always say, is it living or not living? And so whenever I say living, they're like, is it a river? So it's really cool when we start to change the values of our culture.
Nice. Sam?
I'm really inspired by my Guardians colleagues, by all of you and other folks at Guardians that aren't here today, because seeing their motivation and commitment and the support that we all have for each other is really what keeps me going. And then to see that spread out into the world, and to see things like demonstrations and climate marches, and knowing that we were also inspiring people to act, educating people about why they should act, and just seeing more of society really understanding the significant consequences and implications of doing nothing.
Nice. Judy?
Well, I guess I would just say ditto. It has been very, very difficult for me and a lot of my friends and people I know to stay positive in this administration. It has been really difficult. Just attack after attack after attack coming at us on all sides has been really exhausting and really draining. Knowing that there are not only my colleagues, but so many of us in the conservation community, but in all different communities, whether you're working with refugees and immigrants and people and poor communities, justice, environmental justice issues, whatever it is, the uptick in passion and outpouring of support has been very encouraging and motivating. People who maybe wouldn't have become a Guardians member or a member of another group now joining us and saying, gosh, what you're doing is so important. I didn't realize this, and this, but your work has been so meaningful. That's been very encouraging.
Yeah.
And Beaver are going to save the world. So there we go.
It's a revolution, right?
Yeah,
It's like
it's the Beaver revolution. It is.
What about you, Jeremy, though? What is your
Oh,
uplifting?
you're turning the tables on
Yeah.
me. This is my Facebook Live. What gives me, well, I gotta say ditto too. That's the easy way out there. But I have to say it's for folks who are checking in and paying attention and supporting us and engaging. Guardians couldn't do its work without the support of its members and the support of its allies and partners, and not just in the environmental movement. Like you said, Judy, there's this increasing awareness that we're all in this together, and so we're all lending support to each other, to whether you're working on social issues, immigrant issues, environmental justice issues. We're lending support in key ways and looking to help uplift the fact that there's this intersectionality within our work. This isn't just about the environment. This is about social justice. This is about access to affordable health care. It's all related. And so I'm so encouraged that there is that increasing awareness, and that in large part, the youth are driving that awareness, because, that just means that the future is brighter than ever. I mean, it really means we're going to have this educated and aware future generation that is not going to make the same mistakes and not going to let the old ways of doing things, the old paradigms, keep us bogged down. So I'm super excited, and thank you to everybody who's tuned in today to check out our Facebook Live event. We're going to keep doing this. We're having a lot of fun. We're mixing it up. Like I said, we're in Portland today with Wild Earth Guardians program directors. Tune in next week. We're going to do another Facebook Live check-in. We're going to actually be checking in on an issue related to the West Elk coal mine in western Colorado. There's a big court hearing coming up, and so we're going to check in on what's going on there. This mine is a very, very dirty mine, vents a lot of methane, which is crazy in this day of age, and is despoiling national forest roadless lands in western Colorado. But we'll give you some good news and reason to be optimistic then too. So stay tuned. And I just want to say thank you to my fellow program directors for joining today.
Thanks for
And
having us.
Yeah, thanks for
Thanks.
having us.
Thanks so much. And I guess we'll wrap it up. So thanks. Take care. Bye.
Awesome.